Hello, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to attend the IT Strategic Planning session. My name is Doug Gallagher. I'm part of the AWS Cloud Economics team. And in today's session, we'll be talking through how we help customers improve IT planning from an inception point through thinking about the decision process. And I'm going to talk through AWS tools and mechanisms to help you do so. And then along the migration journey, as well as post-migration, how we help you with forecasting and best practice around demonstrating the value of IT. Specifically in this session, I'm going to be focusing on how we think about IT as a business, running IT like a business. And the specific components we'll be going through are, first of all, the investment planning process. What are the tools available? How should we be thinking about that? What are the important KPIs? Then I'm going to talk through the business value areas, the non-cost components, and leveraging some of our benchmarking approaches to help you do so. And then post-migration to AWS, what are some of the best practices and tools around actually forecasting, controlling your spend, continuously monitoring your spend to be proactive with your business stakeholders. And then lastly, I'm going to talk through best practice around actually demonstrating the value of IT to your business stakeholders. Before I get into the overall session here, I want to talk through briefly about my background. Before joining AWS, I was an IT finance director for a large bank. And so I'm very familiar with managing, controlling, reporting a large amount of IT expenses, over $1 billion to business stakeholders. There's certainly a lot of pain points and challenges I've faced. And there's opportunities for AWS to help address a lot of these pain points. And some of these you may experience yourself currently, and there may be more than here. Here's just a couple of examples. Firstly, we used to get this from our business stakeholders all the time. Well, what am I getting for all these expenses? It was about over $1 billion, and that flew through the general ledger to the business. But what's the transparency? What are the details? How can I help prioritize? Another area is around over time the budgets kind of flip between discretionary versus non-discretionary. So there's less dollars available to actually grow the business. So I'm going to talk through best practice around how AWS can help flip that back so there's more opportunities to grow the business. Number three is there's really a lack of a standardized framework to help build up an investment proposal or business case, which led to more time gathering data, building out custom templates, and reinventing the wheel continuously. Another challenge I face is the inability to forecast outside a quarterly or monthly basis. So we'd have to wait for actuals to come in to do variance analysis, which could be challenging. So it was more difficult to be proactive. And then lastly, another really big challenge was from time to time, there was expense reduction targets, and there was more top-down. So there wasn't necessarily a seat at the table from IT, so it was more reactive versus proactive. So I want to talk about how we can help address some of these challenges, and specifically around how we think about running IT as a business. So from where I came from, our CIO had this mentality of IT needs to have a seat at the table with the business stakeholders, and we need to be accountable from an IT perspective to actually run IT similar to how the business stakeholders do so. Think about what our expenses are, how can we control them, how can we contribute to the business growth versus being a cost center. So with that being said, there's four broad areas here that I'm going to focus my presentation on with examples, along with how AWS can help along the way. The first area is investment planning that I mentioned in the beginning. So having a standardized approach to gather data, come up with KPIs, and develop investment proposals that can help working with the business to prioritize the projects. When there's an opportunity to migrate, ideas for reinvention, and a mechanism to go back and look at projects that we looked at in the beginning, and maybe there's an opportunity for those to move along later on in the process. The next is around benchmarking. So benchmark is a really good approach to understand how an organization compares against one best in class, as well as versus a peer set, to understand what are the KPIs, how should we measure ourselves, how do we continually measure ourselves. And we have an approach from AWS. We've developed a benchmarking site, which I'll go through with examples on how we help customers do so, specifically around quantifying the non-cost benefits. And then moving along on the third side, so beyond just the investment proposals and development KPIs, when we're on AWS, what are the tools and processes available to help customers manage and forecast accurately expenses, specifically AWS expenses, And where I came from, there was a mandate from the CIO down to the CTO level that forecast variances needed to be 1% or less. There's a really big focus on accountability for forecast accuracy. And there's tools available through AWS to help you do so. And then fourth, and potentially most importantly, is what are the examples and tools available from AWS to help customers really demonstrate the value of IT? Again, beyond just a cost center, how do we look at business KPIs and objectives? How does the IT tie back from a front to back view to those objectives? So we'll talk through some best practices around there. In addition, helping to talk through the best practices beyond just top-down cost cutting, but what are the ways to be proactive to help optimize spend? So firstly, I'll start through the investment planning session. And I like to look at this in three high-level buckets. One is gathering the data and information in an automated fashion. Second is establishing the KPIs for the investment proposal or / business case. And then I'm going to walk through an example of how we've worked with customers to help prioritize projects as part of the migration. So at AWS, there's a tool we have called AWS Migration Evaluator. And this tool is agentless, and it allows in an automated fashion to be installed in a customer environment. And again, it's agentless. And it runs a time series analysis on the customer's infrastructure. And it's a way to gather information in an automated fashion to help develop a high-level directional business case. And one of the big benefits is it takes off the heavy lifting from customers as it runs that time series analysis over 15 to 30 days to gather really rich information, and it helps the automating the build of the business case to understand what are the cost savings opportunities, what are the right sizing opportunities. In addition, it can look at Microsoft licenses to understand where there's opportunities to save on Microsoft licensing cost. This tool is available to customers at no cost, and we use it with customers all the time. And it really just takes off the heavy lifting of helping to build out the analysis and gather all that data. So after gathering that information, we need to think about what are the KPIs that are important in a business case or investment proposal. And so here are some examples. So on the left-hand side, these are more cost-focused. So probably more obviously return on investment. Well, that's usually pretty important to customers when they're building up an analysis. How much is it going to cost me to migrate? How long is it going to take me to get that return on investment? And what does that look like over time? But moving to the right, more specifically, moving more towards business objectives are, depending on what the application is in scope, what is that, for example, the cost per transaction? And is there an efficiency opportunity there, or can we help grow the business? What about downtime? Can we look at our applications in scope, and are there downtime issues, and can we help improve that by moving to AWS? In addition to on the more agility side, what are the time to market improvement benefits look like? Is there a revenue improvement opportunity? So these are the KPIs we see customers think about and include in their business cases. And we have benchmarking, which I'll go through the next section to talk through how we actually help customers quantify those areas. I want to talk through an example of how we worked with a telco company to help prioritize projects as part of their investment proposal. In this case, a customer it was about 15 really large projects. And they said, okay, this is great. They built an overall business value assessment, but they were looking for help on, at a project by project basis. Is there a way to help us prioritize, including the business value benefits? So in this case, we worked with the customer to create a score mechanism to actually compare project by project across multiple dimensions. In this case, the dimensions included the cost of migration, the annual cost moving to AWS, as well as business value benefits, including staff productivity, resilience benefits, as well as business agility. And for each of those dimensions, we included a weighted average. And specifically, we scored each of those metrics from 1 to 10, where 1 would be from a cost perspective, the most costly. So therefore, there's potentially more risk. Whereas less costly would have a higher score. And for the opposite, on the business value side, so the more business value, the higher the score would be, and the less business value, the lower the score would be. And then what we did was we actually we developed a bubble chart to compare the projects. And in this case, the circles represent the overall business value of the projects. So we'll see here in this chart, for example, project 3 compared to project 5, from the size of the bubble perspective, there's overall more business value. So in this case, the customer selected project 3 because it had greater business value, and overall the migration complexity was lower, and it had a good ROI. So from a risk perspective, the customer said this could be a great candidate. But moving to the right, for example, project 2, there is business value, but it's a little more complex, and maybe that's something we want to think about later down the line as we kind of revisit our investment proposals in the out years. But from the next year, project 3 seems like to be a great candidate. I'll come back to this example later, but this is an example of pulling together the business value side along with the cost to help kind of prioritize project by project. So now I want to walk through benchmarking and how we actually can help customers quantify business value areas. So our team, Cloud Economics, over the last couple of years have, based upon feedback from customers, have helped develop a study of 1,500 customers to survey, to talk through, what are the specific KPIs they've achieved by moving to AWS. So specifically in this study, it was 1,500 customers that have been on the AWS platform for over a year. And we focused on KPIs across these 4 buckets here. In this example, this is for telco companies. So this 1,500 customer survey, which is still growing, we're still expanding. We have it by industry vertical as well as workloads. So for example, if it's an ERP workload or an HPC workload, et cetera. And in this example for a telco customer, we can see some of the KPIs from the study that customers reported out on. Overall, telco companies saw a reduction in cost by about 38%. And then moving along to the business value benefits, the productivity side around improving the time spent on managing virtual machines or storage, for example. So there's hours that can be saved and repurposed elsewhere. And then on the resilience side is around improving the uptime of the platform. And KPIs include overall number of incidents per month, security incidents, mean time to resolution. And then on the agility side, there's a variety of KPIs, including around developer productivity, such as the ability to improve the delivery lifecycle, the code deployment lifecycle. Other benefits include revenue uplift or net promoter score increase. And aside from a peer set perspective, we see customers also look at measuring against industry best in class. So, measuring from a peer set perspective and say, okay, well, if we want to become or measure ourselves against the top in the industry, what do those benchmarks look like? So what our team is actually doing in a study that we're currently working on is surveying customers that talk through the best practices. So from the slide I showed you beforehand, that talks through increasing the amount of the deployment, for example, or number of releases. Well, what are some of the best practices instilled in order to do so? Or customers that saved a certain amount in cost, what do they actually do to save those costs? So that's something that's coming out in one of our next studies. And I want to round out this benchmarking study by talking through a specific example. So here, this is with an insurance company. In this example, the customer was interested in, beyond looking at the cost savings opportunity, specifically looking around what the cost savings opportunity would look like by moving the platform from a risk reduction perspective. So in this case, on the left-hand side of this slide, these are the KPIs for insurance companies from our benchmarking study. As you can see here, reduction in critical incidents, reduction in security incidents, overall reduction in downtime for production environment, and an improvement in mean time to resolution. So in this case, we looked at the overall reduction in critical incidents. And the customer specifically said we wanted to look at a disaster recovery. So if in the next 3 years there was a downtime event, the critical applications would be down for approximately 48 hours, which translates to about 2,880 minutes. Now, the customer actually had an internal metric around that cost of downtime, which was 88.51 per minute of downtime. Now, some customers may not have that metric, so there's third-party studies out there, such as the Ponemon Institute, that have stats around what makes up a cost of downtime, such as revenue loss or cost to get the environment back up and running. So in this case, we use the customer's internal metric, but if not, we can use a metric through one of these third-party studies. But we use the improvement, the 32% from the peer set, to understand what that improvement could look like if there was a disaster recovery event. So doing the math here on the right-hand side, the overall risk reduction is about $8.1 million. So this metric was actually used in the overall business case that was presented to the senior executives within the customer stakeholders as part of the migration investment proposal. So this is one example of using the benchmarks to actually help quantify the business value benefits. We can also use the KPIs for the business agility, such as revenue uplift or the developer productivity as well. So beyond the investment proposal and quantifying the value benefits using benchmarking, when customers are on AWS, we have tools and mechanisms available to help customers improve their forecasting accuracy. So I want to talk through some of those tools and best practices in this section. But before I do so, I want to talk about a holistic IT spend forecast. It can be pretty broad, as some of you may be very familiar with. And so these are some of the components that make up the complete IT forecast. Well, one is the business demand or the transactions and volumes. That's going to feed directly into the planning and of what's going to be provisioned, whether it's on premises or the cloud. And then moving to the right-hand side, the infrastructure that aligns to that business demand. So that's going to include the resources that are working on the projects, the cloud forecast, the non-cloud forecast, as well as other overhead expenses. And then there's also the developer side, the technology development. So that's the resources of the developers, the software, and the other overhead expenses. And then there could be another layer that could be a middle, depending on the business, that could be a middle office that sits between tech dev and infrastructure in the business, which is an additional layer. So overall, these are some of the major components that make up the complete forecast when we think about an IT cost perspective. Okay, so from there, what are some of the best practices and tools we have available to help customers actually forecast those expenses and report it back to the business to talk through what's the value that's being delivered? There's a couple of different approaches. One is a trend-based. The other is an event-driven. And then there's also, with both of those, there's ways to actually control and continue to monitor. And there's tools we have available to do so. So from a trend-based perspective, we have AWS Cost Explorer. This provides visuals based upon prior spend to predict what we think spend will look like in the future using machine learning algorithms. It's a great user-friendly tool. It's available to all customers, and it's a really great way to understand, based upon your existing spend, where we think you're going to land. But some customers, beyond just a trend-based forecast, want to look at more of an event-driven. So, for example, maybe there's a project, Project 3, for example, that we talked through earlier, that maybe it's not going to start through halfway through the year. So when we look at a trend-based forecasting, that may not be picked up, right? So there's tools available. This example here is Anaplan. It's a third-party tool that allows us to build up an event-driven forecast to look at, what are some of those projects that we're still planning for that don't have actuals yet. It also allows the ability to pull in other IT expenses as well as all your actuals to build up a full comprehensive forecast that ties back to that slide I talked about initially, that pulls into all the IT components of a forecast. So aside from forecasting, there are tools available to help control and continually monitor AWS Cost. For example, AWS Budgets. AWS Budgets, it allows customers to create their own budget thresholds so they can receive alerts if any costs and usage exceed or forecasted to exceed the limits. It has a variety of features, including the ability to actually automatically send reports to stakeholders, such as both finance and IT, at any point in time. So, for example, in the middle of the month, to show certain projects to alert you how it's looking against the set budget, which is a really great way proactively to understand what are the opportunities or who do you need to speak to understand where the variances are, versus waiting to the end of the month to actually explain those variances. And it has the ability to have those continuously discussions between finance and IT. And you can allow many stakeholders within the organization to have access to these reports. Another tool available via AWS is AWS Purchase Order Management. I actually started my career in purchasing, and this is actually a really great tool because it provides a simplified view to view and manage all purchase orders in a single console, and it allows customers the ability to do a variety of things, including match purchase orders to invoices, allows customers to manage and track statuses along with balances and expirations. So it's another great opportunity for customers to leverage, actually help control and automate the monitoring of expenses. So aside from the tools that are available to help customers with forecasting, as well as what I talked through earlier around developing investment proposals, as well as helping to quantify business value, I want to move into the last section, which is how can we help customers develop the value of IT? So for my days in finance, oftentimes results were presented in a table that had really just numbers without the story. So this is an example here by project, where we run different reports to understand, okay, what's our full year budget by project, where are we trending from a year-to-date perspective, from actuals to budget to forecast, and where are we thinking of the land at the end of the year. So in this case, we can see, and this is an example, that project 3 looks like we have a 6.5 million adverse forecast to actuals or to budget. And then on the flip side, project 5 looks like we're going to be slightly favorable, right? So these are really just numbers, but there's really no story. So how can AWS help customers talk through, visualize, and explain the story? Well, one great way to do so is we have visualization tools in AWS. For example, customers can import what's called a cost and usage report. And this is essentially a dump of all the details of costs through AWS. And customers can take that, they can, through a couple steps, import it into a tool called Amazon QuickSight. And from Amazon QuickSight, customers can develop visualizations to really drill down and understand and visualize the cost components. And that could also be, customers can also look at that at line of business level or other tagging mechanisms using tagging in AWS. Customers can also develop heat maps, and so therefore they can compare project by project or line of business by line of business and drill down to understand where are the real drivers of the cost by different product services at the line of business or project level. But taking that a step further, I'd like to revisit project 3 that I talked through in the very beginning, which we selected because that had a great amount of value, overall pretty good ROI. But if we're looking at this, 2 slides ago, there's an adverse variance to forecast. But if we can, beyond just visualizing, can we look at a business KPI to understand what's going on? So in this example here, I'm looking at the application that this project supports. It's a business-facing application or a customer-facing application, and we're looking at the number of transactions. So as we can see here, over time, the transactions have increased. And the purple line represents, if we go back to our investment proposal, what the on-premises cost would be before we migrate to AWS would look like over time. And we see it's flat, then it kind of increases as the transactions increase. But when we look at the AWS side, we see that over time it's actually reducing. So the cost per transaction is actually reducing. So yes, that in this case there was a variance, but it seems like the variance is driven by the increase in transactions. And if this workload was not moved to AWS, the cost would actually be higher. So this is an example of a way where IT can work directly with the business to actually explain the variances from a business perspective beyond just the cost. And so closing out, I want to talk through a topic that was very, very common where I came from, where there was expense reduction targets, and it was challenging to work with the CTOs across my organization to help achieve those targets, to come up with a plan to meet those expense reduction targets. Oftentimes, it was more of a top-down approach where we would look at, if you look on the left-hand side here, we run views at the line of business view, for example, to look at the cost buckets by line of business. So, what is technology, which is development expenses, infrastructure expenses, other expenses. And then from there, we try to say, okay, here's the biggest spend. Can we take a certain percent from each of these areas? So, for example, here, line of business 5, infrastructure is pretty sizable. Can we reduce that by a certain percent to come up with our, to help us meet our reduction target? Moving more towards a proactive mechanism, we can use, as I mentioned earlier, reporting such as Cost Explorer to understand from a proactive basis, what are the areas where we can actually reduce waste on AWS. For example, improving our savings plans coverage, or maybe certain workloads can be moved to spot instances, or storage, for example. Maybe we can use different tiering options to reduce that cost. So from using some of our reporting, we can actually proactively come up with these areas. And this doesn't have to be once a month, once a quarter, etc. This can be daily, more frequent, where IT can come up with these recommendations on a more frequent basis versus on a reactive basis where there's cost reduction targets that come down from the top. And then IT can work with the business to help proactively come up with these areas to help meet those targets earlier on in the process and help demonstrate the value. So I walked through a variety of topics today, but I really want to let you all know that AWS is here to help customers along the way, and we have a lot of great tools and resources to help you do so. First of all, we have the Migration Evaluator, which I talked through earlier on in the presentation. The link is up here. It's available for all customers to use at no cost. So our website is here, so you can go through, you can submit a request. Another area is we have our Cloud Economics Center webpage, which has a lot of great resources, including talking through our benchmarking study, as well as other white papers and value realization studies. We have our Cloud Financial Management Solutions website. We also have our cost management blog, which will talk through new tools and programs available to customers. Then lastly, you can speak with the account manager to directly engage with me and my team. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to attend this session today. I hope you were able to get a good amount of value out of this, and ultimately, we are here to help. We have a variety of programs available to help you along the journey.